The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
There's something really appealing about a story that can be told. You know, you have this one scene that could be written in like 1 or 2 pages in a book of prose, but a verse novelist can take that same scene and write it in just a few short lines. You get rid of anything that's not absolutely essential to the core, the heart of the story, and it just, I don't know, it's something really cool and powerful about that.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Poet Rebecca Gomez is the author and also the illustrator of Mari in the Margins, a middle grade novel in verse. Her editor, also a poet, is Rachel Donahue of Bandersnatch Books. For the first time on the Habit Podcast, in this episode I'll be in conversation with both the author and her editor. Rebecca Gomez and Rachel Donahue, I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
I don't know that I've ever had the author and the publisher together on an episode. This is fun. I'm excited to hear two sides of the same story from you two. Of course, Rachel is one of the principals of Bandersnatch Press, Bandersnatch Books. What's the official Bandersnatch Books?
Yes.
And Rebecca is the author of Mari in the Margins, a novel in verse.
Yes.
So let's start with you, Rebecca. What is this book? Tell me what this book is.
What is this book? This book is, not to sound corny or cliche, but it is the book of my heart, as they say.
Okay.
And I'm so excited that Bandersnatch Books, Rachel and everybody there loved it enough to bring it into the world. So Mari in the Margins is a middle grade novel in verse and doodles, which I always like to add, about a young girl named Mari. Maribel is her name, and she is the middle child of 9 children, and she just feels understandably kind of overwhelmed by all of the chaos of her family. But it's really, she feels overlooked, and she feels like she really wants to be seen. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, she has a hard time seeing anything in herself that's really worthy of notice. Mm-hmm. And so, but she's a poet and she's an artist, and she observes the world around her really well. But she feels like the chaos of her family is holding her back as a poet. And so when she has this opportunity to enter a poetry contest at school, she sees this as her chance to finally maybe step outside of the margins and into the center and be finally seen. So that's what the story is about.
Yeah. I love that idea of her feeling unseen, wanting to be seen, but also not wanting to be seen, or maybe not feeling like she's got anything to give.
Right.
Such a middle child thing.
Yeah, and frustrating situation to find yourself in.
Yeah, Becky, you're a middle child yourself, right? From a largish family. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, middle-ish.
Middle-ish.
I am the third of seven.
Yeah.
My parents adopted the seventh when he was already like 8, and so my brother and I shared the middle spot for a long time.
Yeah.
So when my youngest brother Q came along, he kind of disrupted that middle spot for us. But yeah, I do know what it's like to be in the middle and be surrounded by all of the chaos.
Well, it's a good perch from which to observe, I should think, being a middle child.
I think so. You hear everybody always talks about how the middle child is kind of the mediator. And I guess, when I think about myself, I do, I guess, fill that role even now as an adult.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a good place to kind of hang out and observe.
Yeah. Rachel, are you a middle child?
No, I am a firstborn.
I had a feeling you were, yeah.
With my 4 boys, I have one who kind of owns that middle child spot in like all the stereotypical ways. And so it was really fun to get to read Mari's story and really identify, because I see it so much in him. Mm-hmm. So that's fun.
Yeah. Well, this idea of a young writer who can't find time to write, that's an interesting idea. I mean, I'm used to grown-ups saying I wish, I want to write, but I'm so busy with everything I've got going on. I don't think of that as being a problem for children, but of course it can be.
Right. Well, of course, I thought a lot about my own childhood, my own upbringing as I was writing this story. And I didn't necessarily have the same problem as Mari as far as not feeling like I had the time to write. But that's because, well, first of all, I didn't have a 3-year-old younger sister who was always hanging on me. Although I did share my room with 2 sisters for a long time. So that was, minimal privacy. But I was the kind of kid who I would come home from school and I would get on my bike and I would ride to the park. I'd be like, I'm out, I'm going to go away. So I can kind of relate to being surrounded by chaos, a big family, relatively small house. But that was my way of getting away and finding time to be on myself. I would go to the park. I would maybe spend some time reading the Bible and praying and writing in my journal. And so that's how I dealt, for myself. But I trying to put myself in a different situation as I wrote the character Mari and giving her a younger sister who, wouldn't leave her alone, and a mother who works from home and, kind of relied on her older, more responsible children to help her out with the younger kiddos. And my brother, one of my younger brothers has 12 kids. And so I've seen a lot of that with the older kids kind of helping out with the younger kids. And so I'm like, what would that be like for, if that was me and I was trying to pursue being a writer and I was in public school, not homeschooled like my nieces and nephews are. So kind of a different dynamic for Mari than it is for my brother's kids. And for me as a kid myself.
Yeah. So this book started out as a picture book, right?
Yes, it did. Well, the idea came as a picture book idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And were you illustrating that picture book, Becky?
No, it never occurred to me to try to illustrate this particular story, as a picture book idea, because this is my first real, foray into illustration. I've done a few like magazine illustrations for things in the past, but nothing. Okay. I've never taken the leaps, so to speak, as far as illustrating a whole book. So this was my first time.
What possessed you to take a leap on this?
Actually, to be honest, when the original manuscript had very minimal illustrations. So it was just, there are handwritten poems, and Mari is a doodler and she writes in the margins. It's kind of a way of brainstorming or just processing her thoughts. And so she will doodle in the margins as she's writing. And so I thought, that would be a cool visual to actually show the handwritten poems and the doodles.
Yeah.
And then a couple of little just like sketchy art journal pages would also be thrown in there too. So I was like, this is something I was comfortable with. I'm like, I could do that. But the folks at Bandersnatch, I don't know Rachel, if this was your idea.
Yeah. I mean,
they said, we want to see more drawings, more doodles. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. I really loved what I saw. And I thought, if we could have this sprinkled all the way through the book, then when a kid picks it up who maybe is a reluctant reader, it's kind of the same thing as like The Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or some of those that they have these little line drawing illustrations that make it appealing because these are kids who struggle with lots of words on the page. And then they pick up a book and they see it all in poetic form, and they see all these doodles in the margins. There's something appealing to them that kind of draws them in before they've even had a chance to start reading the words. And I thought, let's lean into that and kind of give them more.
Yeah. I love the pictures, and the they're good little drawings, but they also feel like something a young girl could have done.
Thank you, because that was a real challenge, honestly. Coming from somebody who I've always kind of focused on detail and trying to be realistic in my drawings, and so it was a real exercise in trying to, think about my younger self and how I would have drawn these things as a 12-year-old. And also it was, it was a challenge choosing what doodles to include, and I wanted them to go with the poem that they were with, but not feel like they were really illustrating it. And so it was a really fun challenge, and I feel a little more confident as an artist now. So thank you, Rachel, for that opportunity.
Well, thanks for leaning into that with us, because I know it was, if I say, hey, I could imagine an illustration on this page, and here's some ideas, like as an author, it would have been easy to say, I got nothing. But the fact that you were able to just kind of dive into that with us and imagine the possibilities and like everything you came up with, it was just like, oh yeah, this is perfect. It was a lot of fun to kind of see that come together.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun to do it.
So let's talk about the whole idea of a novel in verse. Rebecca, what made you want to do a novel in verse? I know you write poems, so this of course is not just one long poem. It's not Beowulf, right? It's
right.
A collection of little poems.
Yes. Yeah, there's a difference between an epic poem and a novel in verse. So what made me want to write one is reading them. So the first novel in verse I ever read was Out of the Dust by Karen Hess. And it was just such a powerful story, and it's just such a quick read, but it just I don't know, it just kind of I think I wrote in a recent blog post that it kind of rips your heart out and then puts it back together again. And anyway, so it made me realize kind of what a powerful storytelling tool verse could be. At that point, I never thought I would write one. I always, I've always been a poet since as long as I can remember, but I never really thought about writing a whole story besides maybe a picture book manuscript in that format. But then reading more novels in verse and seeing how the different kinds of stories that could be told, that's what made me realize that maybe I could, because there's so many different types of stories you could tell through a novel in verse. And
when you say it's a powerful storytelling form, can you give me an example of a way that a bit of story in verse is more powerful than say the same story in prose?
I don't know that it's always necessarily more powerful. It's just that it's so condensed that it just I think in some ways it just feels like it's more of a punch,
Yeah.
So, for example, I love to read like big sweeping epic fantasies, and they're, big, like, I don't know, 100,000 word books. And I get caught up in all of the description and world building and all of that stuff. But there's something really appealing about a story that can be told. You have this one scene that could be written in like 1 or 2 pages in a book of prose, but a verse novelist can take that same scene and write it in just a few short lines.
Yeah.
And it's kind of I see it as sort of, you strip away all of the unnecessary fluff, and it's not necessarily unnecessary, depending on what type of story you're telling, but you get rid of anything that's not absolutely essential to the core,
Mhm.
the heart of the story. And it just, I don't know, it's something really cool and powerful about that. I can give
Yeah.
you an example from Mari and the Margins if you'd like.
Great. Let's hear it.
Okay, so some of the poetic forms, excuse me, that I use are haiku in the story. I think I use 10 different types of poems to tell the story, but haiku is one of them.
Yeah.
And this is a poem, a haiku from pretty early on in the story. And the story, if you've read this far, you know that Mari's life is chaotic and her house is, full of people and noise and everything. So this is the story, the poem. Post bedtime quiet. Mom sits reading on the couch. Approach with caution. And so I could have easily written a paragraph, describing that scene of Mom sitting probably in a dark, dimly lit living room reading and just trying to take a break from the rest of the day. And Mari being, like, should I dare go talk to her?
Yeah.
Is she stressed out? So, but it's just those 3 lines that capture that vibe.
Yeah. I love the way Mari has a English teacher or literature arts, whatever they call it, who requires her to try out different forms. That lets you try out different forms. I like that little trick that you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really fun way to work in the different poetic forms into the story.
Yeah. And so these poems are almost all of them are just sort of lyric poems, condensed. I mean, I'm saying the same thing you said in a different way. The way you have distilled, the way you use verse to distill experience, as opposed to, sometimes you'll just see in a storybook, maybe a not super well written storybook, I'll say, where verse is just there for the purpose of making it jangly and making it a little more. I mean, children enjoy verse, whether it's good poetry or not, but you take seriously the remit to condense, right?
Right.
And not just to fill out lines of verse or to make things rhyme, or actually most of these poems don't rhyme because there's a little bit of rhyme in there, but not much, right?
Right.
And most of the rhyme is there because the teacher required her to do a little rhyme.
Right. There's sort of a thread through the story about rhyme, which is one of the story arcs in the story.
Yeah. Now, Becky, you had some rejections trying to get this thing published. Is that true?
Oh yes, I at least I counted this morning.
Good.
From the ones that I've counted, 31.
31 rejections.
And one of those was a revise and resubmit. So it took 9 months for that.
Oh wow. You revised, resubmitted, and the resubmission got rejected too?
Yes.
Okay.
But the story was much stronger, I think, after that. So
yeah. And then Bandersnatch Books said, maybe we will.
Yeah. Actually, it was more of an enthusiastic, yes, absolutely. Okay. We love this. I think, so we had 50 something submissions with our last round. And there are very few of us who are wading through all of those submissions. So we have a lot of things to read.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure for Mari that Carrie had looked at it before the rest of us. And she said, I want you to be sure to take a look at this one, like prioritize this one in your list of things to read. And when I cracked it, Mari's voice was so strong from page 1. I just fell in love with her. And the deeper I got into the book, I was blown away by what a powerful, multi-layered story could be told in so few words. I mean, I think Mari's 15,000 words. Is that right?
Yeah, about
approximately. And I mean, that's not a lot of words when it comes to a novel. And yet the complexity of the story that's told, and so many layers and so many relationships and personalities that are developed over the course. And it's so authentic. Like, I really felt like I was peering into the journals of this middle school girl. And it wasn't like so many middle school books nowadays are like, they're written older. Like they're written almost from the perspective of an older teenager to appeal to middle graders. But this one felt really authentic. Like I'm really reading the poetry journals of this 12-year-old girl, and I'm just taken up in her story. And I don't want to give away any of the spoilers for the ending, but it had me in tears. And I was like, how did she do this? It's amazing. And so, yeah, when we all read it, it was an enthusiastic yes from us. We wanted this book to be in the world and get it in people's hands. I think I think they're going to fall in love with Mari the way we did.
There's nothing better for me as an author to hear than someone to say that my book made them cry. So thank you.
Yes. I mean, even when I went back through it again, I got emotional at the ending, even editing, like I'm going through and looking with a critical eye, and it's still moving me in that way. Like that's really powerful. And I feel like I really know Mari, and I want good for her. And so when her friendship with Tyra is threatened by the arrival of a new girl at school, like I'm invested in that relationship, and it's in so few words. And I just love the power of that. Like Becky said, the Ant-Man of the Ant-Man of the writing world.
The novel in verse is the Ant-Man of the writing world. Yeah, it does so much and so little.
It's amazing. I had read one or two before this, but reading Mari made me realize, oh wait, there's a lot of power in this form. And since then, I've read one or two more that Becky had recommended, and I love it.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun.
Becky, can you put your finger on what the folks at Bandersnatch could see that the other publishers were having trouble seeing?
Gosh, I wish I think honestly, part of it was, we were submitting I had an agent at the time, and she was submitting to a lot of big publishers, and they had a lot of other books that they were publishing. Yeah. And so, I got a lot of feedback. Oh, we love the voice. So this is a really nice story. Rebecca's a strong writer, things like that. Mm-hmm. There was always a but we have we don't do very many novels in verse. Oh, right. Novels in verse are hard sells, Yeah. So I think that was part of it. It's like, so when
it may not have been a failure on their part to see, probably wasn't. Right. I mean, I can't imagine somebody not seeing what a lovely voice, this character has. Well, I'm sure they saw it.
But then, there were some that were just, it just wasn't their thing, and that was fine. So, but I don't know. I think maybe part of it is just Bandersnatch has sort of a different way of viewing the world and the kinds of stories that they want to put out. And so, when I had the opportunity to submit to them, I had actually heard about them through your podcast.
Oh, really?
Long time ago. And I thought, you know what? They would probably be a great fit for Mari when my agent and I had parted ways, and we hadn't sold the book. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to just try this on my own. I'm going to send it to them and see what happens. So.
And I'm so glad she did. I mean, really, that's our passion. Our tagline is publishing treasures found off the beaten path for lovers of all that is good, true, and beautiful. And I feel like Mari fits that because, I mean, there are novels in verse out there. It is a genre, but, like the publisher said, it's probably not a high selling genre. Like it's one of those things that, yes, it can be done powerfully, but there aren't gobs of middle schoolers out there lining up to buy novels in verse. So, but we look at this and say, this is a fantastic book and it needs to be in the world. And we, as small as we are, have the opportunity. We can put this in the world and get it out there to readers and give it a place because it needs a place. Mari is amazing. And it's just such a fun story and so beautifully told. And we're excited to get it into people's hands.
So Rachel, I hear small publishers talking about being able to take a chance on things like this, novels in verse. To tell you the truth, I'm not clear on why a small publisher is in a better position to take that kind of chance than a larger publisher. Can you shed any light on that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think for big publishers, they're looking for someone who has a platform already, someone who's got, 20,000 followers or 100,000 followers, people, because they're looking to sell the book on a big scale from the beginning. And so as a small publisher, I mean, when your first print run is 1,000 books and then you sell those and then you do another print run, then you can take a little more of a risk. You know, the quality of the work is good, and it doesn't matter whether or not the author has a platform yet, because you're helping to create that platform. And so we're working together. And I mean, honestly, I've been so encouraged to see how people have responded to the books that we're putting into the world. They love our books. They come back looking for more. We've met a lot of people at conventions and at shows. And, you know, when we're out working the booth, people are looking for content like this. And the big publishers aren't necessarily putting out the books that the people we meet are wanting to read. And so when we get to put a good book into their hands and they read enough of these good books and they know that they can trust the quality of what we're doing, then we're creating the product that we know there's a market for this. It may not be the market that the big publishers are looking at, but we know there is a market and there are people who want to read this, and we get to give it a chance to be in the world without the gatekeepers of what they're looking for, what the culture at large is wanting to read. And we're looking at, but here is a segment of people who don't want to read that, who want to read something better. Yeah. And so we get a chance to make that.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I don't know that anybody's saying, of course, Random House is a well-respected publishing house, but they're so broad that nobody's saying, oh, okay, Random House put this out. I guess that's something I might want to read. Whereas, you know, I mean, there are lots of things that Random House puts out that I really want to read and lots of things that I don't. And you are creating a catalog where if anybody likes what you're doing, they're going to like a lot of what you're doing. Right.
Yeah. It's kind of a niche market that we see here, especially at like middle grade. I've talked to bookstore owners who say, we need more middle grade. We need more good middle grade, because so many middle graders are reading up and reading books that are far too mature for them. And they don't have enough good literature, new literature that appeals to them where they are as middle schoolers. And Mari does that. Like, Mari and the Margins is such a solidly middle grade book that, I mean, like, and I wouldn't hesitate to give this to any, like, I actually left it out lying around on the couch, hoping my kids would pick it up, and they did. And they were flipping through and they were like, Mom, this tells a story. I'm like, yes, it does. They're used to poetry books that just, you know, it's a one-off poem. And they were like, hey, if you read these in order, it tells a story. I'm like, why don't you start at the beginning?
There you go. The difference between an epic poem and a novel in verse.
That's it.
All the poems working together to tell a story.
That's right. Yeah. It was a really, really fun to see him kind of discover that on his own. So, yeah.
We haven't even talked about, you know, in a lot of ways, the story works like an epistolary novel. You know, just a little dispatch from this day and then the next day and the next day. Yeah. Although it's an epistolary novel with only one letter writer.
Almost like reading a diary, except instead of keeping a diary, she writes poetry in a poetry journal. But it really sort of functions as her diary, that she's kind of documenting what's happening that day. And sometimes it's just a flurry of words in a run-on sentence prose poem. And and you get the feeling of the chaos around the dinner table as all these people are talking, and she's just wanting to get one little word in edgewise.
Yeah.
Right.
Becky, do you think you have another novel in verse in you?
Oh yes. I have this is actually the 5th novel in verse that I've written. And I have another one that's a work in progress. That's a historical fiction.
Really?
So I was hoping to finish it, you know, this spring, but I've been so focused on Mari and the Margins that I kind of neglected it for a while. So we'll have to see.
Yeah.
But
is it a secret what era this historical novel is set in?
This novel is set during the school children's blizzard of 1888. Are either of you familiar with that event in history?
No.
Did I think I read about this in a Ron Hansen's book, Nebraska.
Possibly. Yeah. That's a big thing. There's also an I Survive.
Tell us about it.
Tell you about the blizzard?
Yeah, about the blizzard.
I first heard about it. I didn't go to school early enough in my elementary years to learn about this in history class. And so I learned about it as an adult at a Ted Kooser poetry reading. And he read for some poems from his book, Blizzard Voices. And he talked a little bit about the school children's blizzard of 1888 and how this storm just came out of nowhere and kind of rushed across the plains, areas in Nebraska and I think South Dakota, maybe Kansas. Anyway, it happened at a very inconvenient time of day at the end, the second half of a day that was really warm and calm. And so it caught a lot of people unprepared.
Yeah.
Kids were at school or they were on their way home from school and people were out hunting and people weren't wearing coats and it was terrible. A lot of people died, actually.
Yeah.
So I decided to write a story inspired by Ted Kooser's poems. I was like, this could make a really cool historical novel in verse. And so I started writing a story about a girl who gets caught in the storm. And, I won't give anything away, but.
Yeah. Well, you need to read Ron Hansen's, I think it's the first story in Ron Hansen's book called Nebraska. That's short. I guess they're all short stories or essays. They're different short pieces. I can't remember what it's called, what the piece is called, but it's the first. It's in the book Nebraska, and it's really, really compelling. So
we'll have to look at it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool! I can't wait to read this book.
Yeah. So how far along are you, Becky?
It's in its first real revision stage.
Okay.
So once I finish it, I always have my daughters be my first readers. They're a really good editorial team, so they've been looking forward to reading it for a while. So
yeah. So Becky, I have a question for you. So you have two grown daughters who are both poets. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? Like, tell me. I really want to know. Like, how did you instill this love of poetry in them?
I think it was kind of the same way that my mother instilled the love of poetry in me, except she wasn't a writer, but she read to us a lot as kids. And I wrote about the cremation of Sam McGee. That's the poem that stands out the most in my mind, the memory of her reading it and just the weirdness and the spookiness and there's just everything great about poetry in that poem, I think. So my mom, reading that poem, and there was Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss and, a lot of other things that she read. And they really captured my attention and my imagination as a kid. And so I used to always try to capture that when I was writing all these corny little rhymes throughout my childhood and teenage years. So I read a lot to my own children as, they were growing up and we were discovering new poets together. And I don't know, they both just really, really enjoyed it. But it's funny because my middle child, my second born daughter, she was always kind of intimidated by the idea of writing poetry until she had to write it for creative writing class in high school. And now she writes poetry all the time. So it's kind of funny to see that. But yeah, I think me reading to them and also reading my own stuff to them and letting them read it kind of inspired them to follow that path themselves. So they're both very creative. My son is also very creative in different ways.
Yeah, it's not poetry. Yeah. I feel like you've skipped too quickly over this idea that your poetic imagination was shaped by the cremation of Sam McGee. We might need to hear more about that. That's pretty wild.
That's pretty wild.
And for people who don't know, that's Robert Service, his poem about somebody who died in the Yukon and they couldn't bury him, so they burnt him.
Yes, the poem
it's as grisly as it sounds.
It is, but it is grisly, but it's also funny.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love the way The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service, who's still one of my favorite poems. Or poets.
Yeah.
It just kind of draws you in. It kind of, you almost feel at the cold. Sam McGee is he's the only one that really just can't handle it. The whole time he's complaining, and then he's like, "Hey, promise me that you'll cremate me when I die, because I just want to be warm."
He's from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows, I think is the way it says.
And I don't know. So that's it. Just the fact that I just felt like I was drawn in, like I almost felt like I was there in a way. It's kind of magical. And
Yeah.
I wanted some of that. I wanted some of that magic for myself.
Yeah,
So
that's funny. Whenever I'm called upon to write a poem, I always go straight to Robert Service looking for his little funny rhyme schemes and meter.
Yeah, he has such a strong lyricism, and it's so much fun to read out loud.
Yeah,
It
and some of it
is.
is so terrible. Some of his poetry is just not good, but it's always fun.
But when it's
Yes.
good, it's very, very good.
That's
That's
right.
right. And
It's
when
like
it was
the
bad,
little
it was
girl with a
awful,
curl on her
right?
forehead.
Right.
And when she was bad, she was horrid. So good. So Rachel, you're a poet. What's it like to edit somebody else's poetry?
It's challenging
Yeah.
because it kind of goes back to that connection between the word author and authorial, like authority.
Mhm.
And so, like, ultimately, the poet has something that they're trying to accomplish in this poem. When it has a strong lyricism to it, or a strong meter or rhyme, it's easy to see where it's not working.
Mhm.
But a lot of poems are free verse, and a lot of the poems in Mari and the Margins are free verse. And so you have to look at, all right, what is the poet attempting to do in this poem? What's working here? And then where do I stumble on the words, or where does it feel clunky? Where could it be more concise? And it really is just trying to help polish what the author is trying to do. But sometimes you might have an idea of a way to polish that goes against what the poet is trying to do. Like they might have, especially as a poet, like I know sometimes you are just really in love with the way you have said something and you want it to say it that way. And so you, as a poet, like going into editing, I just felt like, okay, how can I help Becky in this instance really accomplish what she is trying to do here? And to make sure she knows, okay, I'm going to make some suggestions, but ultimately it's your decision. You have the authority of, you can push back on this.
Yeah.
And then we'll find something that works. And as an editor, there are hills I'm willing to die on. And then there are areas where I can see that something's not working, but I don't have the solution. I'm just pointing it out so that you as the author can find a solution that works. And I thought it was a lot of fun working with Becky on this project. Like there was a lot of fun, like playfulness of ideas and in that refining process. It wasn't a push-pull. It was like give and take and molding and shaping. And it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like collaborating.
Yeah.
So there's a poem close to the end of the story where there's two words intermixed, intermingled, and so we kind of they were like, how can we make these words look a little bit, stand out a little bit different so they feel intermixed? And so there was some back and forth about how we should format that. And I never felt like I was like pressured to do anything, the way Rachel saw it. And so it was a really fun process working with her.
Becky, how often did you take Rachel's suggestions, and how often did you have to tell her to take a hike?
I think most of the time I took her suggestions, or at least like I said, just kind of collaborated to make sure we were both happy. But a lot of them were like, oh yes, this is a very straightforward, oh, maybe we should break the line here, instead, or so
I think at one point there was one poem that we broke into two different poems or something like that, just so that it laid differently on the page and it felt like there are two ideas here. And but it was just how can we polish this and make it the most seamless experience for the reader? And and some of that is about, a novel in verse isn't necessarily as what's the word when you linear.
I'm drawing a blank. Linear as other novels. And so sometimes it's like, this is happening, and it makes it seem like the poem about, I think, the pozole, when they're eating the pozole.
Yes.
And then there's some things that happened during Mari's party, and they said, well, this is a little bit confusing. So we had to rearrange things. And I think I ended up writing something new just to make sure that it was, didn't get confusing for the reader, but
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't even talked about the fact that, Mari's from a bilingual family, and that a lot of interesting things, that creates a lot of interesting opportunities for you as a poet. I love both sides of her family. They're so sweet and so sweet to each other. Her family from Mexico. I guess they're from Mexico.
Yes.
One side of the family's from Mexico, and
her
the other side of the family is from just regular, just Nebraska. Long-time Nebraska people. Yeah.
Right.
There's one poem where Mari is comparing her grandpa and her abuelo. Can you read that one, Becky? Because I love it so, like, it captures so much of her voice and the reality of what it's like to be a part of her family.
You know what page it's on?
I think it's on page 66.
I can find it really quickly, but yeah. Actually,
yes.
One of the editors that looked at Mari in the Margins, actually, she really liked that scene, and she said that she would love to have a picture book with that concept.
I haven't. Fun.
Is it this one, Grandpa and Abuelo, on page 66? Is that it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I will read it. Grandpa and Abuelo are both tall, both balding, both wearing graying mustaches, but Grandpa's skin is fair and freckled, and Abuelo's tan and leathery. Grandpa's hair has wisps of gold, Abuelo's flecks of black. Grandpa tests his Espanol. Abuelo fumbles English phrases, but both laugh from deep in their bellies when Jorge chases Clara with a bug. Kind of the classic.
I love that. I love both grandpas working on the other grandpa's language.
Yeah.
It's
and one of the reasons that I wrote the story this way is because I wanted to kind of have a tribute to my family. My husband's family is from Mexico. And so we raised a family with, a kind of a blend of cultures and languages. And so I wanted that to be reflected a little bit in Mari's story, and to kind of honor my husband's family as well as mine as I wrote it. So, and it was a really fun in writing it, to kind of sprinkle those Spanish words in. And
Yeah. And it feels so authentic. Like, they always say, write what you know. And it's obvious that you know what this feels like, this blend of cultures, as someone who has lived overseas. And we've kind of lived in that mix of, like, speaking two languages at home. And there was something very authentic about Mari's voice, and her family feels like somebody I know. It was just so much fun. So much fun to meet them.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love that.
All right. Before I ask my last question, I'm going to give Becky a chance to ask Rachel a question. Anything you want to know? Anything you want to put Rachel on the spot for?
Oh gosh, I wish I. Thanks. I don't know. Okay, how about? Let's see. Do you have a favorite poem from the book? How about that?
Oh, favorite poem. Oh my goodness. Man,
just don't spoil anything.
I know. Well, I think the spoiler poem might be my favorite. There is one that's about nighttime, where nighttime is the best time, like the only time she can find time to write. I really like that one because I identify with that so strongly.
Yeah.
But then the spoiler poem at the end makes me cry every time. So
yeah, that's a really sweet poem. Too bad we can't talk about it more.
I know. Well, people just have to buy the book and read it.
I really like the nighttime poem too. And I think it's partly because it's fun to be able to do repetition on purpose.
Yes.
And so, it sounds fun, and it's fun to write. And, when you're intentional about it, you can get away with it. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Isn't there an owl involved in that poem?
That one? No, not the owl is not in that particular. No, but the owl does show up a lot.
The owl does show up, and often around the nighttime poems. Yeah, it's fun.
Rachel, would you like to read that poem?
Yeah, I'll have to find it.
It's short.
It is short.
They're all short. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the poems in Mari in the Margins fit on one page. There's a few longer ones, but
okay. Here it is.
Okay, here's Rachel's favorite poem. Well, one of her favorites from the book.
Nighttime is the best time because it's the only time for me time, alone time, quiet time, thinking time, writing time, when everyone else is sleeping time. feel like I could have written that one.
Yeah.
So I identify so strongly.
All right, Becky Gomez, tell me, who are the writers who make you want to write?
Okay, there's a lot, but
Okay.
the two that came to my mind when you prepared me for this question before was Sharon Creech, who she writes a lot of middle grade stories, and a lot of them are written in verse. And the one that is my favorite of hers is Love That Dog, and it's the perfect example of how condensed, how tight a novel in verse can be, and just how powerful a story. And it's only 86 pages, but it's an entire novel, and it's very, very well done, and just really gets you. That's one of those that Rachel, you were talking about how the ending makes you cry every time.
Yep.
Well, that's how I feel with Love That Dog. Every time, it just chokes me up. So I would just love to be able to write the kind of stories that she writes that people can respond to, like I respond to her stories. So I love her stuff. Also, C.S. Lewis, just because I don't really write the types of things he writes, but I love the way his books just always feel welcoming to me. Like, I don't know, like opening up the Chronicles of Narnia just feels like almost like coming home,
Yeah.
And I feel like I would love to have tea with C.S. Lewis. And if my books can be that for somebody, like they open it and they just feel like they're, welcomed into the pages, then, hey, that's a good thing.
Yeah, great. Well, Rebecca Gomez and Rachel Donahue, thanks for being here. It's been so fun to talk. And I just really enjoyed Mari and the Margins, and hope a lot of other people do too.
I'm so glad. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.